Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today and welcome to our firm's Investing in India program for the 10th webinar in the series. My name is Purti Manawala and I'm a partner in Khaitan's Corporate and Commercial Practice Group. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to every one of you wherever you are around the world. Investing in India is a webinar program curated especially for existing and prospective foreign investors in India and their advisors to enhance understanding of key issues in doing business in India. The program seeks to cover over time all issues of interest to our target audience. Real estate is a critical sector that plays a central role in economic development, wealth creation, and investment diversification. It encompasses a wide range of activities, including the development, acquisition, leasing, financing, and management of land and buildings, both residential and commercial. For foreign investors, real estate can be both an attractive opportunity and a complex landscape to navigate. When investing across borders, understanding the local legal framework, regulatory environment, market dynamics, and tax implications becomes essential. Factors such as land ownership, restrictions, zoning regulations, foreign investment caps, approval processes, and compliance requirements can significantly impact deal structuring and timelines. In today's session, we will be discussing FDI, key structuring considerations, data centers, warehousing, and so much more. On the slide is the agenda for today's program. If you do have questions, please submit them using the facility provided in the webinar portal. If we do not cover any questions during the webinar, we will respond offline by email after the webinar. Please note that a copy of the presentation, summary notes, and a recording of this webinar will be sent to you after the webinar as a matter of course. Let me now introduce our speaker for today. All registered participants should have already received an email with the resume of our speaker and myself, so I will keep the introduction fairly brief. Our presenter today is Harsh Parekh, who's a partner with the Real Estate Practice Group at our firm. I would now like to invite Harsh to present. Over to you, Harsh.
Thank you so much, Purti. Thank you. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for spending this time with us. Our topic today really is going to cover more about foreign investors investing in India. We are going to cover the regulations surrounding foreign direct investment. We are going to cover why real estate in India. We are also going to cover which subsectors really are right now booming in real estate in India. And of course, then we'll cover issues surrounding titles in India and the ways to mitigate these titles. So can we move to the next slide, please? The first real question is why real estate and why India? India has come a very long way when it comes to real estate. We've always seen and heard stories that a buyer is shown a land parcel in India, and after having closed the transaction, he's only found out that the seller who he bought it from was never the owner. From that to this India, we've moved a long way with receiving close to $45 billion of inflow on an annual basis from foreign investors through foreign direct investment. India as a market has around 1.4 billion people, which requires housing, schools, hotels, offices, and these therefore will never go out of flavor. We've also seen a rapid expansion of the middle class, evolving consumer aspirations, and very strong economic fundamentals, which has driven this growth for real estate. Demand for grade A offices, tech parks, GCCs, co-working spaces has seen an extreme demand, especially in tier 1, tier 2 cities such as Bangalore, Mumbai, Hyderabad, and Pune. You also see likes of Boeing and Microsoft who open large centers outside of the US, and their facilities in India are second largest to their facilities in the US. India, of course, is a fast-growing global hub for data centers, and thanks to the exponential rise in digital consumption in India, which is attracting extreme heavy investment from technology firms and global investors. Even though domestic developers in India are looking at suburbs and tier 1 and tier 2 cities to leverage the growth potential available. Cities such as Jaipur, Bhubaneswar, Nagpur, Rajkot, Ahmedabad, Visakhapatnam has seen tremendous growth even on the residential segments. At the same time, concepts of live, work, play requires large community living townships, which is what's happening in India today. Mumbai is attracting huge amount of investments with the Mumbai 3.0 and the newly opened the Navi Mumbai airport. The entire region has seen a huge growth spurt around the Panvel region. With this, we will just move to the next slide on what are the regulations covering the FDI investments. As most of you would know, FDI in India especially is 100% automatic. There is no permissions required from FIPB or any other government authorities. What is permitted is construction development projects, which includes townships, residential, commercials, hotels, resorts, educational institutes, or any recreational facilities. So till the time money is coming into India for construction development, it's an absolute 100% automatic route without any consents. One can also invest into the Indian real estate built assets like malls or commercial, business centers, provided that they will continue to operate and manage those sort of buildings, be it malls, retails, or business centers. Therefore, one, of course, 100% FDI on construction development and 100% on already constructed assets, provided you operate and manage those assets. What is also permitted is you can have 100% FDI in real estate broking services. What is not permitted in India, especially from an FDI perspective, is buying and trading in real estate. What does that mean? That really means that the investor cannot come in, buy a land parcel or a constructed asset, and without either developing it or without either managing or operating a built asset, it just wants to sell and make a quick buck on that, and therefore that is prohibited. What is also prohibited is buying agricultural land for agricultural purposes or developing farmhouses or villas. So therefore, you cannot buy agricultural land from a FDI perspective for agricultural or farming purposes. However, you can of course buy agricultural land provided you're going to put it to non-industrial or industrial non-agricultural use, such as manufacturing, data centers, and that you have to put that land to use immediately upon it being purchased. So therefore, the guiding force in terms of agricultural land is it cannot be purchased for agricultural purposes or for villa development, but it can definitely be purchased for your data centers, warehousing, logistic purposes. It comes with some riders where you have to put the land to immediate use, and you also need to get the same converted immediately on it being purchased. We can move to the next slide, please. So what are the restrictions, if any, once you bring in the FDI? The monies that you bring in, every tranche of FDI investment has a lock-in of 3 years. Or if you've constructed at least some sort of trunk infrastructure, which means roads, water supply, street lighting, drainage, sewage, then you can exit from that project. You don't necessarily need to complete the entire project and then exit. So either you have a 3-year lock-in or you've completed some sort of trunk infra, which we just spoke about. So these are a couple of things that a foreign investor needs to bear in mind, that the monies that they bring in to India, they will either be under a 3-year lock-in, or they would at least have to complete some sort of infrastructure work before they are repatriating that money out of India. Another important aspect to be kept in mind is that today there are no restrictions for a foreign investor to transfer its holding in the foreign company through which it's investing. So these restrictions apply to the India SPV, not on the foreign SPV. And of course, one needs to also keep in mind that if you bought land in India through your Indian SPV from a government owner or a government authority, it needs to also comply with whatever rules and regulations those government authorities come up with. Now, when you buy land as a foreign investor for development, you of course will have to comply with the local development norms. There are no difference in terms of norms for development for a domestic player and a foreign investor. It's the same level playing field for the domestic buyer as well as the foreign investor. So be it the local approvals, development control regulations, one will have to comply with those to ensure that you can construct and complete in a timely manner. Yeah, we can move to the next slide, please. Now we'll quickly move to some key trends that we see in India, especially in the last few years. And the top of the list would be commercial real estate. Post-pandemic, we've seen a huge demand come back into office and commercial. India, it's the most rapidly growing sector presently. Even in India today, commercial FDI, 100% FDI is allowed in construction and development or completed assets. There is no minimum area requirement or no minimum capitalization. So you can buy as small as $1 million and as high as $2 billion, $3 billion. There is no cap either on the minimum side or the maximum side. Neither is there any cap for buying a particular minimum amount of area or built up area. Of course, as we spoke about, FDI is also allowed in completed revenue generating leased assets, provided the investor manages and operates the asset and just does not buy it for speculation and sells them. Again, the same, we've seen a lot of foreign investors joint ventures with domestic buyers, with domestic developers, where the domestic developers bring in their local expertise in terms of approvals and in terms of getting concessions. However, it's a common phenomena in India that when you apply for construction approval in India, you really don't need a project plan. You really need a meditation plan. But things are changing for the good, and therefore having a local partner helps with the given expertise that they have on ground. We've seen a lot of success stories, be it the Blackstone Embassy JV, which led to the first ever REIT listed in India, being the Embassy Office Parks. We've also seen the Blackstone K Raheja JV, which again led to the second REIT in India, which is the Mindspace REIT. And then we of course saw Brookfield being so successful with their office commercial REITs, spaces where they listed their own REIT in India. We've also seen a lot of robust and global corporates coming into India with GCCs models, grade A offices working well. You have the Microsofts, Boeing, Google, Amazons of the world coming and picking up space in India for their global consumption centers. And I think the rising infrastructure with India, which India provides today, with ports, with a lot of new highways, coastal roads, airports, that's created a huge impact on the local market and has opened up huge demand for good offices, especially in tier 2 cities. And therefore, that's a big market for any foreign investor to watch out for. We can move to the next slide, please. The next key trend that we've also observed is residential real estate. We've seen a huge growth in demand, especially post-pandemic. People realize that having a home for themselves is very important. Renting alone may not cut the cloth. Therefore, we've seen a lot of demand in residential, especially in tier 1 cities. We've seen society redevelopments. Every second society in India, especially in Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi, is going through a redevelopment spurt. And that's a huge potential for any foreign investor. Titles are generally clean when it comes to society redevelopments. You don't see many title issues when it comes to redeveloping societies. Having a strong Indian partner helps in navigating through these issues of members, getting them to be convinced for redevelopment. Again, in society redevelopment or any residential development, 100% FDI is allowed. It again suffers a 3-year lock-in, or at least having some work done before you exit. What one needs to keep in mind when it comes to residential redevelopment is provisions of the new act that India has adopted 8 years ago, which is the Residential Act, which is the Real Estate Regulation and Development Act. We call it RERA, and also the new regimes such as the GST, goods and service tax regimes. This has streamlined the processes quite well for India. It's become more transparent in terms of approvals, in terms of what titles are available, what the developer's track record is, what stage the developer is in terms of construction, how much borrowing has he made, how much sort of loans does he have on his books for that project. So it gives a lot of information available at a click of a button, and each project in India in residential needs to be registered with the authority which is formed under the new law, and which brings about a lot of transparency going forward. The largest example we've seen of foreign investors investing in residential in India is Blackstone, who's invested in the Indian listed entity of Kolte Patil. That really shows that the foreign players are looking at Indian real estate in a very positive manner. We can move to the next slide, please. The next big thing we've seen post-commercial and residential really is also data centers. Similar to commercial and residential, again 100% FDI is permitted in data center business. Similar terms of lock-in, etc. Even repatriation, same norms apply as they apply for residential and commercial. The biggest advantage that one has in terms of data centers is that it's classified as an infrastructure sector, which means really that loans are available at a cheaper cost. So therefore, it's the higher IRR play for any foreign investor. What's ensured that demand for data center grows is also our local data center norms, which has ensured that all data that is stored in India, which is generated in India, needs to be stored in India. So therefore, that has driven a lot of demand here for data centers. We've also seen a huge amount of usage for cloud storage, streaming, and development of 5G technologies. India's public sector undertaking, the BSNL, has generated its own 4G technology today, which is very rare in amongst the other world peers here. So therefore, the huge potential for a data center market as well. And it's our digital personalization laws which requires us to store data, be it for a credit card company, be it for a telecom company, be it for digitization, be it for payment gateways. One needs to store that data in India. So therefore, we've seen a lot of players, be it Digital Realty, be it Brookfield, be it Blackstone, be it Digital Edge, lot of large players coming and buying lands in Navi Mumbai, in the South India region, and looking at players to kind of operate the data centers. Given even the Amazons and Googles of the world have their own sort of data centers in India. We can move to the next slide, please. The next large opportunity and large aspect that we've seen of real estate is warehousing and logistics. This has been a game changer. In India, we were used to a 1 day or 2 day delivery from different quick e-commerce solutions. But now with new sort of quick e-commerce coming in, we have been used to a 15-minute delivery. That has changed the game completely, ensuring warehousing needs to be met with. You need to have in-city warehousing. So that's again a large potential that we've been seeing. So again, similar to your RESI commercial data center, 100% FDI is allowed in warehousing logistics park. And again, the similar exit provisions apply. Warehousing, similar to data center, is also a infrastructure sector. And therefore, similar to data centers, you'll have cheaper loans, quicker loans, and better IRR for an investor. The entire shift in warehousing is also attributable to the whole China plus one strategy for India. Global manufacturers are moving base to India, such as Apple. You've seen now iPhones being manufactured in India, and many other global companies coming in, like Boeing, setting up shop in India. That has ensured that the warehousing logistics place is here to stay. And quick e-commerce, again, which with apps like Zepto, Blinkit, has changed the market when it comes to warehousing. The other largest example, or rather advantage for warehousing, is also a quick sort of turnaround. Every building or a warehouse that is constructed, generally it's a 8 to 12 month period within which flat out warehousing product can be put and be exited and leased. So therefore, the cycle for churnout is quick compared to office and of course residential. Blackstone obviously has invested heavily in Indian warehousing. You have other examples of foreigners coming in, like such as ESR, Indospace, and developing warehousing in India. We can move to the next slide, please. So now that we've spoken about FDI, how does it come into India? What are the restrictions around FDI in terms of lock-in and sort of trunk infra? We can discuss a few things on how foreign investors can exit India and what we've seen play out in the past. So there are three or odd strategies that one can adopt. One, of course, is the India SPV level sale, where you can sell your stake in the Indian SPV, and that's how you kind of take our money out. At this point in time, you will also have to consider some tax considerations, whether your investment has come through Singapore, Mauritius, Cayman Islands, and basis that you will have to decide which is the best strategy. Also, the second strategy that one could adopt is a foreign to foreign sale, which means that do not sell the India SPV, but you sell the foreign SPV from where you've kind of invested into India, and then that transaction can be a manner of tax efficiency from an Indian perspective, because there is no transfer happening at the India level. The third aspect which we've seen, which has been very sort of sought after, are listing it as REITs or InvITs. We have now 6 REITs successfully listed in the Indian market, and SEBI has ensured that it's a robust mechanism for a lot of large investors to exit India. And we've seen one of the most successful being the Blackstone REIT and the Brookfield REIT, which has come with local JV partners such as Embassy, Raheja, and of course Salarpuria being the last one. So that REIT of course gives you a huge potential to kind of cash out, and also ensure that it gives money to your investors back from where you're investing. And third and the fourth, of course, is a direct asset sale, which really means that at the India SPV level, you sell the land, not your shares in the company, but you sell the land to a prospective buyer. However, this comes with its own constraints, where again you have a larger, higher amount of stamp duties which needs to be paid, capital gain tax needs to also be paid, and then again when you repatriate your money out of India, again it has a level of taxation. So from a tax and stamp duty perspective, maybe asset sale would not be the most conducive sort of structure to exit. However, of course, it exists, and one can really evaluate which of these four, be it the SPV sale at India level, be it the sales at the foreign level, be it a REIT or an InvIT investment, or be it a direct asset sale, any of these strategies can really be adopted. We can move to the next slide, please. Now we can talk about a few common real estate issues that most investors face, be it foreign investors, be it domestic investors, and very typical sort of real estate title issues what people face. First and foremost, title in India is not guaranteed by the government, unlike many other developed countries. So that's something that one needs to, sort of be mindful of. And therefore, the example that we started with, we need to ensure that the person you're buying from is the real owner. As one would know, India has diverse castes and creeds. We have our own personal laws, which really means that inheritance in India is different from person to person. Therefore, you need to ensure that the person that you're buying from is the entire owner, and that there are no other siblings of his or family members of his that you're missing out, because that could lead for a potential dispute post purchase. So in case, say for example, a person A was the owner and he passed away leaving behind 5 children, and you've dealt with only 3 and you were never aware that there were other 2, you could be potentially facing a problem with the other 2 coming behind you after you purchase, saying that their rights exist and they've not been bought over. So therefore, these are the most typical sort of title related issues we've seen, where inheritance laws needs to be closely studied, closely analyzed, and understood that you bought from the rightful owner. The other aspect that we've seen play out, and which is the most critical, are labor dues and labor settlements, because most land parcels, especially freehold land parcels in India, were either earlier used for factories or manufacturing. And if you're buying one of those, then the biggest hurdle we've seen every investor face, or every Indian developer face, is a labor settlement. So if all labor dues or labor settlements have not been kind of worked out, that could potentially hinder your entire purchase transaction. And therefore, it's most critical to ensure before you buy that whether there were laborers, and if those laborers have been duly settled, there are affidavits, there are documents on record to show that they have been settled. And we in India have a authority which gives a certificate called a no objection certificate, saying that all laborers are settled and that therefore there is no objection on the labor front to sell the land parcel. So it's an extremely critical approval which one needs to bear in mind before you buy land, especially if there are laborers in that. If there were laborers and there was a factory running, we need to ensure that this certificate is available. Otherwise, any land parcel purchased without this NOC can be vitiated by the authority, saying it's void ab initio. Similar to labor, we also have our own factory laws. If there was a factory running there, we need to ensure that the factory was closed, or if it's moved to another location, we need to ensure that there is a certificate to that effect, that either the factory is closed from this location and that it's moved to another location. So therefore, inheritance laws, be it labor, factory, extremely critical. The other thing that we've come across most often than not is that most owners do not have their own original title documents, and the chain of title deeds, they are either lost, they are torn, some have lost due to floods in their region, and many excuses come forward. So how do you deal with those? You need to ensure that none of these original documents have been either deposited with any lender or for the purposes of mortgage. So therefore, it's extremely critical to also ascertain where those originals are, and whatever steps need to be taken, which are prevalent in India, the market practice needs to be followed to safeguard yourself from any misuse of original documents. The other thing, when it comes to real common issues on real estate, we've seen are encumbrances. At most often than not, especially when one's buying larger tracts of land for manufacturing, data center, warehousing, you have hundreds of acres being purchased at a time, where encumbrances are not noted in the government records. So it's extremely critical for you to ensure that there is a thorough check done by your lawyers, by your advisors, to ensure that there is no encumbrance. And there are multiple ways to do it, by doing searches at the local authority, by issuing public notices, and there are various other ways to figure out whether there were encumbrances. Because if there was any encumbrance on your asset which you were not aware of and which you did not realize, and you bought it, those sort of encumbrances, and the persons who are, who have created the encumbrances, or in whose favors it's being created, can come after you to seek damages. Therefore, it's again extremely critical step to ensure that there are no encumbrances. And the other most common fact that we've seen are disputes and litigations on an asset. Unlike many other jurisdictions, India does not have one codified place where one could go and do a search for all disputes and they would get a response. Therefore, every court needs to be searched either through online processes or physical searches. Therefore, it's extremely critical to ascertain whether there are any disputes pending on the site. Of course, you will rely on your seller's representations. However, it's also critical for you to independently assess whether there were any litigations on the property. More also often than not, we've seen that litigations have been settled, but they've not been withdrawn from court. So as a precursor, as a CP, one needs to ensure that all of these litigations that were pending in courts are asked to be withdrawn before you kind of come and purchase. Another aspect of lands, especially if you are aware that in India you'll have government land, you'll have freehold land. So if it's a government land, you need to ensure that all the lot of rules, regulations of the government are followed before you purchase, whether there was a notice to be given, whether there was consent to be obtained, whether there's a transfer premium to be paid. These all sort of aspects needs to be taken into consideration, because every different arm of government has their own independent set of rules and regulations which needs to be followed. So that's another critical part. The other thing that one needs to really bear in mind is also the user of the land. Whether at all, the user of the land permits you to use for what you want to set out yourself to buy. So if today an investor is investing in India thinking it will buy land for the purpose of data centers, does that user or does that zone where the land is allow you to use and develop a data center? So if it's in a residential zone where the data centers can be developed, so that's something that one needs to bear in mind. We can move to the next slide, please. The other aspects which are very critical is when one buys land, you also need to ensure that whether there is any reservation on the land. That simply means that if I bought a land where, say, there's a bullet train being constructed, whether my land parcel is going to be acquired by the government for that bullet train purposes, or for metro, or for a hospital, or for a school. So every area has its own development plans, where development plans will notify whether your land is demarcated for a particular purpose. So it should not be when you go to buy a land and you bought it, later you realize that this land was reserved for a playground or a school. So therefore, it's extremely important for an investor to investigate even that aspect, whether there is any government reservation or a playground, school reservation, and one needs to check that out as well. The other thing that one needs to check out is also that whether from an environmental perspective, the land can be developed, or whether the land falls part of some forest zone, some ecologically sensitive zone, or it's a CRZ zone, which really means that it's abutting a coastal body, which is either a sea, a lake, a pond. And therefore in India we have coastal road regulations. So we have to ensure that those coastal zones regulations are very well followed, and you're not kind of tripping any of those norms. And the last thing that on diligence that I would like to sort of bring about is that when you buy agricultural land for either your manufacturing or industrial or warehousing logistic purposes, it's very critical to ensure that whatever you are buying is below a ceiling limit. In India, you have ceiling laws which does not permit a person to buy above a particular ceiling limit, and the ceiling limit differs from place to place and differs from nature of land to land. Therefore, there's no one single formula of ceiling. It differs. One needs to check where they are buying land, what's the sort of ceiling limit, and where do they see these ceiling limit play out. So therefore, it's extremely critical to look at ceiling laws. It's also important to look at different municipal laws, because once you buy land and when you want to construct, whether, from a municipal land perspective, you can construct what you are setting out yourself to be. So today, if you want to buy land and construct a office of 1 lakh square feet in India, whether the laws there permit you to go up to that amount of FSI, and whether there is any restrictions around, be it height or otherwise, one needs to sort of look back. So this is all, in terms of real estate diligence issues. And it's a funny thing that many of our investors tell us that especially in the US and Europe, they go back 50 years and they are aware of who the lands were being owned by. And we keep saying that we go back to the Mughal era to look at where our land parcels come from, but we don't know who owns the mango tree right next to us. So while it all looks extremely difficult, but it's not as bad as it looks. And we can move to the next slide where we'll talk about some mitigation that we can look at. Yeah. So how does one navigate through this whole so complex sounding real estate aspects and diligence issues? So the most important aspect is you have the right advisor advising you. You have the right ways of doing things. Therefore, when you buy land in India, the most critical part is doing a title diligence. Be it a title diligence to ascertain who the real landowner is, to ascertain whether there is any encumbrance, to ascertain whether there is any litigation, to ascertain whether you are dealing with the rightful owner, or whether there are some pitfalls. So therefore, doing a title diligence is extremely critical. India has many diverse states. Every state has its own norms when it comes to construction. While of course we have our own Transfer of Property Act in India, which is common to the entire country. However, local nuances play out, especially when you are buying government land, especially when you are dealing with the lands which are owned by government. So therefore, it's very critical to even investigate those in terms of what those rules and regulations are, doing your own checks and balances to ascertain that the diligence checks out, that the entire process is fully followed. And therefore, I would say that due diligence is paramount when it comes to any real estate acquisition. The other most critical part of real estate buying in India is also technical diligence. It's sometimes not, it's ignored, but we would suggest that doing a technical diligence on whether environmental issues are away or there on the land, as we spoke, whether any water bodies are surrounding the land. Therefore, do you need any coastal zone regulation approvals? Do you need any state level environmental approval? Do you need any height approval, whether there's an airport around it where you cannot construct a particular height? So therefore, technical diligence becomes extremely important. Say even also aspects like soil testing. When there was a factory on a land which was a heavy manufacturing unit, and if the soil has been contaminated for some or the other reason, how do you remediate it? What processes can be followed? And how do you ensure that you get the right sort of soil for you to construct? So all of these become extremely important. And I would say that, last but not the least, that one needs to sort of follow is also a very good tax sort of structuring, because it also depends on where you are coming from, what tax regime, whether India has a treaty with that tax jurisdiction, and what are the pitfalls there. How would you ensure that you could save some tax when you repatriate your money out? So structuring again a transaction becomes extremely critical, especially for foreign investors, because they are amenable to tax in their own home country plus the investing country that they're coming from, and of course in India. So how do you navigate the entire tax situation becomes very, very critical, in addition to of course title and technical we spoke about. Because while you may buy the best land, while you may have the best investments, but if from a tax perspective you've not structured it well, the money that you promise back to your investors in terms of your IRR returns can suffer a lot. So tax becomes even more important, as important as land title diligences and technical diligences. So with this, I think we've summarized, the entire foreign direct investment. We've at least, talked about the coming into India. We've spoken about how do you exit. We've spoken about subsectors, be it commercial, data center, warehousing, residential. We've also spoken about the pitfalls on title, on how do you mitigate those title issues. So I hope that by the end of this, you found these, some worth of your time, and I hope it made a difference in you understanding your Indian real estate aspects. And I think with this, I will hand this back to Purti and see if there's any questions from the audience.
Thank you, Harsh, for that really interesting presentation. I definitely found it very useful and enlightening. There are, of course, a few questions that have arisen while you were sharing your presentation. The first one, I understand you briefly covered it, but there's still a specific requirement that is there any consent that you require from any other authority while entering Indian real estate from an FDI perspective?
Yeah. So no. So there is no consent required from any authority, especially from an FDI perspective. It's 100% automatic route, provided, of course, it's for construction development, for like we spoke about township, residential, commercial, hotels. But you're of course not allowed under an FDI at all if you're buying agricultural land for agricultural purposes, or you are looking to trade in real estate, which really means that you want to buy without developing, without managing, but just buy, hold it for a year or two and sell it. I think that is not permitted. Having said that, of course, as we spoke, you could buy malls, retail, commercial offices, maintain, operate, and then sell, which is fine. So therefore, I think the nuance really is that the government of India wants you to ensure that the money that you put in here, you're just not coming in to speculate in real estate and sell. You are really coming in for developing and making it better, or you're buying a constructed asset, operating, managing it, keeping that for at least 3 years, and then selling. So in a nutshell, no consent requirement when you come in, and of course you just can't do agricultural land buyings for agricultural purposes and trading in real estate.
Okay. The next question is, can foreign investors exit a project without completing the entire project? Is that permissible?
Yeah, that's great. So I think there is a myth that you have to complete a real estate project and only then can you exit. So that's not something that is correct. When can you exit? You can either exit after you finish 3 years of lock-in from the date you invested into India. So that means every tranche of foreign direct investment has to be in India for 3 years. Or if you finished your trunk infrastructure, which really means street lights, streets, water, water kind of connection, sewage treatment plants. If you've done all of this, and even if you've not completed 3 years or you've not completed the entire asset, you can still exit and repatriate your money back into your home jurisdiction. So you definitely don't need to be here till the entire project is complete.
Fair. Harsh, what are these some major title issues that are seen by foreign investors while acquiring land parcels in India? Is the next question for you.
Yeah. So I think, as we spoke about, I think the major title issues that any investor sort of looks at or has suffered is more on the fact that they've missed out a couple of legal errors in their document to buy. They've not been able to get all on the same page, or they're not even aware that beyond these two or three that they're dealing with, there is someone really who's left out. Like, for giving an example, if today, if a father owns a property, and he has a daughter who has predeceased him, now the daughter's husband will also get a right in the asset. And when, say, today, if an investor is buying directly now and is only dealing with the son of the father and not the daughter's husband, that's going to be an issue, because he's left out the daughter's husband who had a right in the project, and therefore that claim will subsist, and no courts in India will give you any sort of relief by saying that I was ignorant, that I was not aware that the daughter's husband had a right, because that's the law that we have in our personal laws. And therefore things like these we've seen also, in terms of other issues beyond title inheritance issues. We've seen a lot of times that they've not seen that there were labor settlements that were pending. They've bought without a labor NOC. They've bought without a factory NOC. In India also, especially in some states, there's still the Urban Land Ceiling Act is still applicable. Most states, like say Maharashtra, is repealed, but there are certain provisions applying. So therefore, one needs to also see from that perspective whether your land parcel suffered any issues around the urban land ceiling. And if yes, then you need to ensure that you've taken the due precautions by going to the government, taking approval, sort of paying the premium. So these are things. And also last, I think the major things are litigation. As you know, Purti, basically in India, we don't have a centralized area where you can go and do a search on litigation. So there'll be some tehsil, some small court in India or in your own land, wherever the land is situated, where the case is pending and one is not aware of, and that could be a potential issue that could bring about a big difference once you bought the land, and then you are suffering because you're ultimately dealing with those issues rather than going ahead and constructing and taking your money out, because every investor wants to ensure that they kind of churn back a quick buck for their investor with a great sort of IRR, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's these are the few issues that we've seen play out.
Yeah. Connected to the whole title issue subject, and which you, of course, elaborated extensively on, the other question is it true that foreign investors should then avoid freehold land parcels and only focus on government lands, because that would inadvertently avoid the land title issues that they always deal with?
No, I don't think that's something that one should really do. While of course many a times, and I've heard this from our own clients, that there are two things impossible to understand in India. One is how God works, and one is how the Indian real estate laws work. But it's not that bad. It's not that bad. I think given where we are from where we were, it's become extremely sort of better. While of course government land gives you that security in terms of title, that you won't get a surprise after buying a government land, but government land again has its own challenges in terms of transfer restrictions, in terms of user. It would never be freehold. More often than not, it will be leasehold. So whether
Yeah.
where that works, because those government land lease tenures come in the way for a foreign investor to exit, because by the time they want to exit, the lease is about to get over. So to get a buyer to buy a land which has only a few years left in the lease becomes a challenge for any investor. So having said that, it's not that bad to buy freehold land. And as we gave examples of large foreign investors in India being thriving, really, most of our Mumbai real estate is owned by the two largest foreign investors in Mumbai. So I don't think that freehold land is a no go. You need to have the right advisor. You need to also ensure that you've done the right diligence. You shouldn't do any sort of shortcuts when it comes to diligence. Whatever is that one needs to do, be it your all steps that you follow for a diligence, one needs to diligently do that and ensure that you've got the right advice. So I think with that, it's not something that it's a taboo or something that we shouldn't touch.
Yeah. Fair enough, Harsh. Harsh, with time permitting, there's one more question that we can take up right now. The
Yeah.
question is interesting, and I know you touched upon warehouses, GCCs, but someone is interested to know which subsector in Indian real estate is seen as more futuristic or has potential in your view.
Yeah. So I think beyond the ones we spoke about, I think something that India is still, sort of dappling is co-living, senior
Mhm.
assisted living, and I would say student housing. So I think these three plays are extremely sort of futuristic, and there is enough and more to do here. With you've seen so many educational institutes, universities coming into India and forming their base in India. They will definitely need a world-class sort of housing for the students that they attract. So therefore student housing becomes very, very critical. We don't have any great sort of student housing yet here in India. So student housing. Second, I would say assisted living, senior living. You have even, of course, though our average age population is very young, but we still definitely have older sort of age group people in India which will need assistance, which will need assisted living. So I would say a good senior living project, a senior living sort of things will kind of boom in India in the next maybe decade. And I think again, co-living, I would say serviced apartments in India are not that prevalent. We
Mhm.
have a notion of at least giving things out on rent at least for 11 months and not lesser. So if you have an expat coming in just for a couple of months, he either needs to stay in a hotel or maybe find some other alternate accommodation. He does not have any great sort of apartments around here which he can bank on. So something which is more sort of a serviced co-living concept, where it's just plug and play for the person to come with his luggage and stay for as much as 5 days to 50 days, is something that's going to be a very big game changer.
Fair. With that, we come to an end of today's presentation. I would like to thank our presenter for sharing his expertise and experience with us today. I thought he did an outstanding job. Thank you so much again, Harsh. After this webinar, we will send to all of you a copy of today's presentation, materials, summary notes, and a link to the webinar recording. You will also separately receive a request for your feedback on the webinar. Please take some time to send us your feedback, comments, criticism, and hopefully some compliments. The form takes less than 1 minute to complete. Thank you for your attendance today, and we look forward to being with you again at future Investing in India programs. Good day.